My name is Natalie Brooks, and for most of my life, I knew exactly where I stood in my family, right at the end of the line. Not because anyone said it out loud at first, but because of 1,000 tiny choices. Who got the new car? Who got the private school? Who got the "You're our priority" speeches? And who got the "You're strong, you'll be fine" pat on the shoulder? It all finally turned into words one night at dinner, when my mom looked across the table, smiled at my sister and said, "Your sister's family will always come first. You are always last." My dad nodded like it was just common sense. My sister smirked, like she'd just won something. I didn't cry, I didn't yell. I just said, "Good to know." And from that moment I started quietly putting myself first. Separate money, separate plans, separate life. I had no idea a family emergency was coming, or that they would still expect me to pay for everything. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you this. Have you ever been told directly or indirectly that you're last in your own family? And where are you listening from right now? And what time is it there? So I know I'm not the only one awake with this kind of story. The Brooks household didn't need to spell out favoritism. It lived in the walls, in the photo frames, in the way money moved and how attention was divided. Our living room had a long wall filled with album frames, one of those Pinterest-style gallery setups my mom loved. Except if you looked closely, really closely, every frame was basically a shrine to Chloe. Chloe at her first dance recital. Chloe at the science fair holding a trophy she mostly got for participation but with enthusiasm. Chloe at prom in a sparkling blue dress with my mom crying behind the camera. Chloe's engagement photos. Chloe's wedding photos. Chloe's baby shower. There were maybe 2 or 3 pictures of me sprinkled in. One where half my face was cut out. Another where I was blurred because the camera focused on Chloe's bouquet. And one shot where I stood at the very edge of the frame like I was a +1 to my own family. Chloe was the princess, the golden child, the Brooks' little star. I was the smart one, the kid who could figure things out on her own, which sounded like a compliment, but in practice meant, we don't have to show up for you because you don't need us. The favoritism started early, long before I had the words to name it. When Chloe turned 10 and I was 7, our parents enrolled her in a private school, the type with polished hardwood gym floors, a competitive girls' basketball team, immaculate uniforms, and field trips that always involved flights or ticketed exhibits. I still remember standing in the doorway the day she tried on her first team jersey, twirling like she was the star of her own sports movie. My mom clapped, my dad whistled, and everyone acted like Chloe had just been drafted for the WNBA. I stood there in my public school cardigan with my name written in Sharpie inside the collar, holding the lunchbox I bought from Goodwill. When I asked why Chloe got to go to private school and I didn't, my mom gently touched my shoulder and said, "Sweetheart, Chloe is so outgoing. She needs a place where she can shine. You can learn anywhere. You're good in any environment, and it helps the family save a little." Even at 7, I understood what that meant. She requires investment. You do not. It only sharpened as we got older. When Chloe turned 16, my parents gave her a used Jeep, old but freshly repainted in a glossy cherry red. They decorated the driveway with balloons, invited neighbors over, filmed her crying, laughing reaction, and my dad spent the entire week talking about how every young woman needs a safe car to drive to school and training. I turned 16 3 years later. I had a shift at the fast food place where I worked part-time, came home smelling like fries and grease, and found a store-bought cake on the kitchen counter with cheap candles, the kind that bend because they've been squashed in someone's drawer. My parents were sitting at the table, looking drained, flipping through receipts. My dad sighed. "Sorry, honey, it's been a tight year." At least you got your own job now. You can buy yourself something nice, right? I blew out my candles and smiled anyway because by that point, I already knew the script. Chloe got gifts. I got lessons. Vacations told the same story. Chloe had entire albums titled Chloe's Summer Adventures. Disneyland, San Diego, Florida beaches, all sunny and curated, like she was born ready for a lifestyle magazine. Meanwhile, most summers I stayed behind because robotics camp is good for your resume, or the Wilsons need someone reliable to watch their dog. It was framed like opportunity, responsibility, practicality, but it was always just code for we're spending the trip budget on Chloe. The one time I did go with them, to a beach in California, my dad handed the camera to Chloe and told her to capture the memories. She captured everyone except me. I was always the one taking the picture, holding the bags, or cropped out accidentally on purpose. When the photos came back, I was in 4 blurry edges out of 300 shots. By the time I was 12, I'd figured out the truth without anyone ever needing to announce it. Our family operated with 2 categories of children. One child who needed to be protected, uplifted, cushioned, and held up to the light at every opportunity. And one child who, apparently, could float, swim, and survive without a life jacket. One child who was an investment. One child who was an afterthought. One child who was always front and center. And one who lived at the edges, useful when needed, ignored when not. No one ever sat me down to say, "You're last." They didn't have to. It was in the way they spent money, in the way they scheduled time, in the way my mom's footsteps always hurried toward Chloe first. It was in every vacation plan where I was staying behind for something important. Every holiday photo where I was a background shadow. Every birthday where I got the leftover attention. It was the kind of truth you don't learn in a single moment. It drips, accumulates, becomes a foundation underneath everything else. College years were where the favoritism stopped being subtle and became a full, undeniable system, an ecosystem my parents created, funded, and protected, all orbiting around Chloe's success while assuming I would simply figure things out on my own. When Chloe got accepted into a private university in California, my parents acted like she had been chosen by Harvard and NASA at the same time. They flew with her to tour the campus, took hundreds of photos of palm trees and brick buildings, posted long Facebook paragraphs about our brilliant firstborn, and used phrases like, "Her future is limitless," "We are so proud," and "This is what hard work gets you." They paid for her dorm, her meal plan, and sent her extra pocket money every month. One night, when they thought I wasn't listening, I overheard my mom whisper to my dad, "Investing in Chloe is investing in the future of the whole family." I didn't know whether to laugh or swallow the sting in my chest. I was already learning that investment in our family didn't mean love. It meant cost, appearance, and where they believed the return would be. My college experience was the opposite. When I asked about help with tuition, my dad didn't even pretend to think about it. "College is expensive, sweetheart. You're smart. You'll manage. Besides, learning responsibility early is good for you." My mom added, "Your sister needs the support more. You're the one who always lands on your feet." So I went to community college in Denver. Not because it was my first choice, but because it was the only option I could afford without going into debt I'd never crawl out of. I worked 2 jobs to cover tuition and rent. Mornings at Walgreens, stocking shelves and ringing up cough drops, and evenings in the community college library as the unofficial IT helper, rebooting professors' laptops and rescuing students' essays trapped in malfunctioning printers. I lived on microwaved noodles, peanut butter sandwiches, and sheer determination. One night sticks with me even now. I was sitting on my small bed, a thrifted mattress on a metal frame, eating instant ramen after a double shift. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. My phone dinged. Chloe was live streaming from a rooftop pool party with her new college friends, laughing under string lights, holding a red cup, her makeup perfect, music thumping in the background. I watched the screen glow in my dark little room, and for a moment I felt like I was peering into the life my parents had chosen for her, while I held the life they had assigned to me. But instead of crying, I closed the live stream and went back to studying calculus. 2 years later, when I earned my associate degree, my parents didn't come. They were in California attending Chloe's senior showcase, which my mom described as so important for her future. I stood in line alone in my cap and gown, accepted my diploma alone, and asked a coworker from Walgreens to take a single photo of me in front of the campus sign. When I called my mom afterward, she said, "We're proud of you, honey, really, but you're so strong. You don't need us standing there for your accomplishments. You've always been independent." At the time, I swallowed those words like warm water. Familiar, bland, expected. Now I recognize them as something else. Permission for them to keep prioritizing Chloe without guilt. After finishing community college, I applied for transfer and earned a partial scholarship to a university in Seattle for data science. It was the biggest academic win of my life. My parents' response? "Seattle is far, but you're the independent one. You'll manage. Sounds like a good fit for you." That was it. No questions about housing. No help with moving. No curiosity about how I'd afford rent in one of the most expensive cities in the country. I bought a one-way Greyhound ticket, packed 2 suitcases, and told myself I'd figure out the rest on the way. While I was grinding through classes, juggling part-time jobs, and learning to stretch $40 over 5 days, Chloe's life accelerated into a fully funded dream. She got engaged to Liam, a man my parents immediately adored because he's perfect for family photos. Their wedding became the event of the year, complete with a designer venue, floral arches, a live band, and a price tag so high that my parents quietly dipped into their retirement savings to cover the shortfall. I overheard my aunt murmuring at the rehearsal dinner, "They're spending everything on Chloe. Must be nice." My parents justified every expense with the same line, "Chloe has a family now. We have to help her start strong." At the wedding, relatives I barely recognized pulled me aside to ask, "So when's your turn? You're smart, right? You must have a good job by now. Are you helping your sister with wedding costs?" Some even said it jokingly, as if it was perfectly natural that my financial success, whatever little I had, should be funneled upward to support Chloe's new family. I smiled as I always did. I posed for pictures even though I knew I'd be on the edge of every frame again. I gave Chloe the nicest gift I could afford, $200 I had saved for months. She barely noticed, too busy opening envelopes with bigger checks. Meanwhile, I went back to Seattle to resume the routine I had carved out of survival. Morning lectures, afternoon coding labs, evening shifts at the library or the campus tech desk. There were days when I doubted everything. My choices, my worth, my place in a family that rarely asked if I was okay. But somehow, each semester, each late-night assignment turned in on time, each paycheck saved instead of spent, added a thin layer of strength I didn't know I was building. The first years of my career in Seattle didn't feel glamorous or extraordinary. They felt like slow, steady climbing. After graduating with my data science degree, I landed a job at a mid-sized tech company, one of those health analytics startups tucked inside a glass building near South Lake Union, where everyone wore Allbirds and carried reusable water bottles. My salary wasn't huge, but it was the most money I'd ever made. I had a small signing bonus, a modest set of RSUs that would vest over 4 years, and, for the first time in my life, coworkers who treated me as an adult instead of someone who could figure it out alone. I rented a tiny studio, barely 350 square feet, but it was mine. I bought a simple desk from Facebook Marketplace, a bed frame that took me 3 hours to assemble by myself, and a few plants that somehow managed to survive despite Seattle's moody winters. It wasn't much, but it felt like the first space in my life where I wasn't living in someone else's shadow. What transformed those early years wasn't the job. It was the discipline I built around money. With no family safety net, no emergency help, and no one to call if things went wrong, I knew I had to create stability with my own hands. I started devouring personal finance blogs on the bus to work, listening to FIRE podcasts during lunch breaks, and watching YouTube creators who explained Roth IRAs and index funds like they were bedtime stories. Every paycheck, I maxed out my company's 401k match, even when it meant eating eggs and rice for a week. I tracked every expense on a spreadsheet. I built an emergency fund, dollar by dollar, until I could finally breathe without fearing a single broken tire or unexpected bill would send my life spiraling. Within 2 years, I took the biggest financial leap of my life. I bought a small condo in Tacoma. It was an hour from Seattle, but it was all I could afford. The carpets were outdated and the appliances were old, but it came with 2 bedrooms. I rented one room to a travel nurse and put the income toward the mortgage. I spent weekends painting walls, replacing fixtures, watching tutorials on how to fix leaky faucets. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't Instagrammable, but it was mine. After a few years, when interest rates dropped, I refinanced and used the freed-up equity to buy a small duplex, not a picture-perfect property, but a functional one. It brought in steady rental income, nothing flashy, but enough to give me a sense of growing stability. I wasn't trying to become wealthy. I was trying to become safe. And then Jason entered the picture, not as some knight in shining financial armor, but as a quiet presence who asked the kinds of questions no one in my life ever had. I met him at a community workshop on long-term planning. He was a financial planner invited as a guest speaker. We ended up in the same small discussion group, and afterward, he struck up a conversation about data analytics and how it applied to financial modeling. It was an easy conversation, the kind where two practical people accidentally reveal parts of themselves without meaning to. We became friends first, meeting up for coffee, sharing articles, comparing budgeting spreadsheets like two nerds who finally found someone who spoke their language. When we eventually started dating, he didn't try to manage my decisions or impress me with credentials. He simply understood why I saved so aggressively, why I planned 3 steps ahead, why I never relied on anyone to catch me if I fell. One night, after I told him a story from college about working double shifts, while Chloe posted pictures from a resort, he looked at me and said quietly, "You built your entire life on solid ground because you were told no one would hold you up if you slipped." No judgment, just understanding. Meanwhile, back in Denver, nothing had changed. My parents still saw me through the same narrow lens they always had. Whenever I visited, my dad would ask questions like, "So, rent must be crazy in Seattle. Are you sharing a place with roommates?" And even after I told them I had bought a condo, my mom's reaction was a dismissive, "Of course you managed. You're the strong one. Chloe still needs help. She has a family to care for." That word, strong, had become a loophole they used to justify never checking if I needed anything, never asking if I was tired, lonely, overwhelmed, or simply deserving of the same support they poured into my sister. In their eyes, my independence wasn't an accomplishment, it was a justification. A convenient explanation for why I didn't need what Chloe needed. They never asked about my job title. They never asked how much I saved or what I was building. They still assumed I was getting by, scraping together rent in some tiny apartment, living a lightweight single-woman life they believed required no real resources. When I mentioned owning rental property, my mom brushed it off with, "Well, You've always been good with money. Chloe could never handle something stressful like that. Once again, my accomplishments became proof of why they didn't need to support me, not reasons to be proud or curious. Even as the duplex brought in income, even as my 401k grew, even as my career advanced, and managers praised my work ethic, nothing changed in the Brooks family dynamic. To them, I was still the kid they left behind on vacations, the teenager they expected to smile through a mini-mart birthday, the young woman they believed could always figure it out. A convenient person to lean on, a backup plan, someone who could absorb sacrifice without complaint. What they didn't realize was that every long night of budgeting, every hour spent learning mortgages, every calculated financial step wasn't just preparation for independence, it was building an entire life they knew nothing about. A life that one day they would assume was theirs to borrow, tap into, or depend on. A life they believed they had a right to, because in their minds, I was still the one who needed the least, asked for the least, and therefore should give the most. By the time I entered my late 20s, I had a degree, a stable job, savings, investments, a condo, a duplex, and a relationship with someone who genuinely saw me. But in the eyes of my family, I was still just Natalie. Single, childless, supposedly living small, supposedly available to sacrifice, still the one who would figure it out so they didn't have to. They had no idea I wasn't building scraps of a life. I was building a foundation. And they had no idea that one day, that foundation would be the only thing keeping their world from collapsing, if I chose to use it to save them at all. Going back to Denver always felt strange, like walking into a museum version of my childhood. Same walls, same carpet, same kitchen table. But none of it really belonged to me anymore. My mom had called weeks earlier insisting I come home for a few days because the kids miss you and Chloe is so busy, you should spend time with them while you can. It was the kind of invitation that sounded loving on the surface but carried the unspoken expectation. Come help, come fill in, come be useful. Still, I went. Partly because I wanted to see my nieces. Partly because some part of me still hoped my family might notice who I had become. The dinner was on my second night home. My mom made roast chicken and set the table like it was a holiday. Chloe breezed in 20 minutes late with Liam and the kids, dropping her purse on the counter, complaining about daycare costs, traffic, and a broken water heater. My parents hovered around her like she was a celebrity making a guest appearance. I sat at the table, smiling politely, waiting for the evening to settle. It didn't. Halfway through dinner, my mom started listing all the upgrades she wanted to help Chloe with, plans she delivered with the same dreamy enthusiasm she used to reserve for prom dress shopping. "We're thinking of redoing the kitchen," she said, tapping her fork on the table for emphasis. "Quartz countertops, maybe new cabinets. They deserve something beautiful. And the kids need a good summer camp this year. Those leadership camps are expensive but totally worth it. And we haven't taken a real family trip since Florida. I think we should plan something for August." I listened, nodding, sipping my water. When she finally paused, I spoke gently. "I'm actually thinking about a few things too. I've been considering switching roles at work. Maybe buying another rental property near Seattle." My mom interrupted before I could finish, her voice bright like she was explaining something obvious to a child. "Natalie, honey, you're single. You don't have kids. You can make decisions anytime you want. But Chloe can't. Chloe's family will always come first. That's just how it is. You've always been last in terms of need." She said it casually, like she was telling me the weather forecast. My dad chuckled, nodding in agreement. "It's not that we don't love you. It's just priorities. Realistic priorities." Chloe laughed, swirling her wine. "We always say, if anything ever goes wrong, Natalie will just swoop in and pay it off. She's the responsible one. She said it as a joke, but her smirk told me it wasn't. For a moment, something inside me went very still. It wasn't the words. They were just confirmations of truths I already knew. But the bluntness, the ease, the confidence with which they assigned me to the bottom of their hierarchy, like my life was a flexible margin around Chloe's storyline. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't fling my napkin across the table and storm out like a character in a movie. I just sat there, breathed, and said quietly, "Good to know." The table fell silent for a split second, confused. They expected debate, reassurance, maybe even gratitude, not acceptance. But inside, something fundamental clicked into place. If I was always last in their order of priorities, then I needed to change the order in my own life. I needed to put myself first, not to punish them, but to save myself. After dinner, when Chloe and Liam announced they wanted to grab drinks with friends, my parents immediately turned to me. "Could you stay with the girls?" my mom asked. "You're so good with them. And Chloe really needs a break." I agreed because I loved my nieces, but I also knew, with perfect clarity, that this was the last time I would say yes without a boundary. I tucked the girls into bed, read them a story, and then wandered into my childhood bedroom. The glow-in-the-dark stars still clung to the ceiling, faded and peeling. I lay on the old mattress, staring at them, listening to the familiar creaks of the house. It was strange how a place could feel so unchanged and yet reveal so much change inside you. I thought about the dinner, about the hierarchy they'd spoken aloud, about how easily they'd placed me in the role of backup adult, never considering that I might have desires, ambitions, or limits of my own. I thought about the condo in Tacoma, the duplex, the spreadsheets Jason and I shared, the life I'd built piece by piece with no help from the family that assumed I'd always have extra to give. And then I made a decision, a quiet one, but unshakable. No more expensive gifts for birthdays or holidays. No more picking up small bills just to help out. No more vague family plans that meant draining my savings or rearranging my life. No more playing the role of the reliable, resourceful daughter who absorbed the consequences of everyone else's choices. For the first time, I placed myself at the top of my own list. As I closed my eyes, I had no idea that this simple decision, to step back, to set boundaries, to stop funding dysfunction, would soon become the reason my family called me ungrateful, selfish, cold. I also didn't know it would be the very thing that months later would become their only lifeline, because the truth was coming. And when it arrived, the same people who told me I was always last would suddenly need me more than they ever had in their lives. The weeks after that dinner felt strangely quiet, not the suffocating quiet of growing up unheard, but the kind that happens when you turn down the volume on a life that has drained you for years. I didn't go no contact with my family, but I slipped into something gentler, something that protected me. Low contact. I replied to texts when necessary, ignored the ones that were just guilt dressed up as concern, and stopped answering every call that came when Chloe needed a babysitter or when my parents wanted help sorting out some minor inconvenience in their lives. When my mom finally confronted me with a soft, wounded, "Why are you so distant these days?" I answered calmly, "I'm busy living my life." It wasn't spite, it was truth. And speaking it out loud felt like inhaling clean air after years of breathing through a straw. Jason noticed the shift even before I did. He didn't push, didn't lecture. He simply asked thoughtful questions that nudged me toward myself. One evening, sitting on the couch in my Seattle apartment with a blanket wrapped around us, he said gently, "Have you ever talked to someone, professionally, about all of this?" I wanted to laugh, to say I was fine, that my childhood wasn't bad, that other people had it so much worse, But the next words got stuck in my throat before I could spit them out. He didn't look away. "You've carried everything alone for a long time," he added. "You don't have to anymore." I scheduled my first therapy appointment the following week. The first few sessions were harder than I expected. Not because I didn't want to talk. God, I had decades of unspoken things knotted inside me, but because putting words to them felt like betraying my family. My therapist, a calm woman with soft eyes and a talent for asking questions that landed like lightning, listened patiently as I skirted around topics, offering polite summaries of my childhood instead of describing the emotional blueprint underneath. One afternoon, after I described the dinner where my parents openly ranked me beneath Chloe, she leaned forward slightly and asked, "If you believe you were always last in your family, then where do you place yourself in your own life?" The question cracked something open. It echoed in my mind long after the session ended. On my commute, in the shower, in the quiet moments before sleep. Where had I placed myself? Somewhere behind responsibility, behind survival, behind Chloe's needs, behind my parents' expectations, behind the version of Natalie they needed me to be. Shifting that placement was quiet work, the kind that wasn't glamorous or easily explained. But it made its way into everything, into how I spent my hours, into the boundaries I built, into the decisions I made. Work became a kind of anchor. With therapy softening some corners of my internal world, I found myself stepping forward more confidently in my job. When a lead data analyst position opened on my team, a role I never would have imagined myself worthy of a few years earlier, I applied. And I got it. The raise helped. The additional RSUs helped. But more than that, the title felt like proof that the life I'd built from scraps wasn't a fluke. It was real, and it was mine. With the increased income, I took another step toward the future I envisioned. I bought a small house on the outskirts of Seattle. Nothing fancy, old carpet, chipped paint, a yard that needed taming, but I saw potential where others saw inconvenience. I rented it out to a small family who needed stability, and the rental income created another layer of financial safety I'd never had growing up. That house became the seed of an idea, one I wasn't ready to act on yet, but couldn't stop thinking about. A fund, a project, something for the kids who grew up being told they were fine, strong, independent, as if that meant they didn't deserve support. I started calling it the Last Child Fund in my head, a future promise to myself, and maybe, someday, to others. Meanwhile, Jason became the first person in my life who consistently, intentionally placed me at the center of decisions. Whenever I talked about a new plan, taking a course, changing teams at work, saving for another investment, he didn't ask whether it would benefit my family or help Chloe. He asked, "Does this make your life better?" It was startling how radical that question felt. No one had asked me that before, not without an asterisk, not without a caveat about someone else's needs coming first. He made space for me, not as a functional part of a larger machine, but as a whole person. And slowly, I started learning what to do with that space. But healing wasn't sudden or dramatic. It came in quiet waves, like realizing I no longer jumped when my mom's name appeared on my phone. Like being able to enjoy a weekend without guilt about not flying to Denver. Like recognizing that loneliness and peace can feel similar at first, but only one of them nurtures you. There were nights when I still felt the sting of being last. Grief for the childhood I didn't have. Anger for the versions of myself who kept trying, hoping, offering. But the difference now was that those emotions didn't bury me. They passed through. They had room to breathe. And for the first time in my life, I had room to breathe too. As months passed, my life in Seattle became fuller, steadier. Therapy opened doors inside me that had been locked for years. Boundaries no longer felt like rebellion. They felt like oxygen. My relationship with Jason deepened, becoming a soft place I could land. My work thrived. My finances strengthened. My heart steadied in ways I hadn't expected. And in the quiet moments, late at night, curled up on the couch with a book, or walking home from therapy with the scent of rain in the air, I realized something profound. Silence didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like ground, like clarity, like the first real chance in my entire life to hear the sound of myself. The message arrived on a Wednesday afternoon while I was in a meeting at work. My phone buzzed twice, then 3 times, alerts from the family group chat I usually kept muted. When the meeting ended, I stepped into the hallway, opened my phone, and felt my stomach tighten. Mom, family meeting on Sunday. It's important. We need you here. That was it. No greeting, no context, no, are you free? Or, can you make it? Just a directive, as if I were an employee summoned to a mandatory briefing. For a moment I stared at the screen, the familiar knot of responsibility tightening in my chest. Then Jason walked up beside me, reading the look on my face the way he always did. "What's wrong?" he asked. I handed him my phone. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Do you want to go?" I took a long breath. "I think I do. Not because they asked, but because I want to hear what they think I owe them now that they're sure I'm still last." Jason didn't try to talk me out of it. He squeezed my hand and said, "Then I'll help you prepare, and I'll be right here when you get back." On Sunday morning, I boarded a flight to Denver with a strange sense of calm. It felt like walking into the final act of a play where everyone else still believed I was playing the same role: dutiful daughter, reliable helper, financial backup. But I'd quietly rewritten my script. When I arrived at my parents' house, the atmosphere hit me immediately. Heavy, tense, frantic in a way that told me whatever had happened was not small. Papers were piled on the coffee table, messy stacks of envelopes, printouts, and legal documents. My parents were seated on the couch, Chloe and Liam opposite them. No one smiled. No one jumped up to hug me. It was like I'd walked into an intervention, except the person being intervened wasn't me. "We're glad you came," my mom said, though her voice had the brittle edge of someone trying to negotiate before the negotiation began. I sat down. "What's going on?" My dad cleared his throat and began sorting through the papers. "We're facing a situation." He said the word like it was fragile, like if he pressed too hard it would shatter and reveal what it really was. Then he handed me the first document. Foreclosure notice. Chloe and Liam's house, 3 months behind on payments. The bank had moved to seize the property. My pulse ticked up as I scanned the next stack. A lawsuit filed by a client at Liam's gym, someone injured on a treadmill that hadn't been serviced in over a year. Negligence, expected settlement, 6 figures. Then the third envelope. IRS past due taxes, 2 years' worth. I looked up slowly. My mom's face was tight, eyes red-rimmed. My dad kept his gaze on the table. Chloe's hands trembled in her lap. "So this," I said quietly, "isn't a situation, it's a collapse." My mom rushed in, as if she needed to shape my interpretation before I could form one myself. "We just need a little help to get ahead of things. We've all sacrificed so much for Chloe and the kids. And now—" I blinked. "We?" My dad exhaled, long and heavy. "We helped them open the second gym. We co-signed the loan. Put the house up as collateral." My heart stopped. "Your house?" I asked. "The house you've lived in my whole life?" He nodded, shame flickering across his face. "It was supposed to be temporary, but when the first gym started struggling, well, we had to make decisions. Decisions they didn't tell me about. Decisions that risked everything they owned. Decisions made under the assumption that I, somehow, would always be the failsafe. So what exactly are you asking? I asked, keeping my voice steady. My dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the way he used to when he was about to give me life advice as a teenager. Natalie, we've always done what we could for Chloe. She has kids. She has a family to protect. Now it's time for us to stand together. Mom chimed in immediately. You're single. You have a stable job. You don't have the same financial pressure. It just makes sense that you'd be the one to help. There it was, the ranking, spoken as naturally as breathing. Me, last in priority, first in responsibility. What exactly does help mean? I asked. Chloe swallowed hard. The mortgage, the legal fees, the taxes. We just need time. We need someone to cover things for a while until we get back on our feet. Temporarily, Liam added, though the way his voice wavered told me even he didn't believe it. My mom nodded eagerly. You could pause your projects for a bit. Use what you've saved. You're good with money. You can rebuild. But Chloe, she can't. Not with the kids. I stared at the mountain of paperwork. They hadn't made mistakes. They had made choices. Irresponsible ones, risky ones. Ones fueled by entitlement and the belief that consequences simply didn't apply when Chloe was involved. And now that the consequences had arrived in full force, they expected me to absorb them like a human shock absorber. Slowly, deliberately, I asked, "And what is your plan if I say no?" The silence was immediate and suffocating. My father's eyes sharpened as if I had spoken in a foreign language. My mother looked wounded, as if the question itself were betrayal. Chloe's chin quivered. Nat, you can't say no. You know I can't lose the house. The kids. There it was. The emotional trump card. The kids. Always the kids. Always the justification. Always the reason I was expected to step in. For a moment, I felt that old sensation rising, the instinct to fold, to comfort, to rescue. But this time, I let it pass through me without obeying it. Finally, I said softly, "I need 24 hours." Relief washed across their faces instantly, so fast it was almost painful to watch. They assumed I was calculating what to sell, what to cash out, which parts of my future I would trade away to preserve theirs. "Of course," my dad said, almost smiling. "We knew you'd come around. You just needed time." My mother nodded, wiping her eyes. "Our Natalie. Always dependable." Chloe whispered, "Thank you. Thank you. I knew you wouldn't let us drown." But as I walked out of that living room, past the foreclosure notices, past the lawsuit, past the taxes piled like a tower of unconscious choices, one truth crystallized with perfect clarity. They didn't want a daughter. They wanted a lifeline. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I wanted to be one. The flight back to Seattle felt longer than usual, as if the plane were dragging the weight of everything unspoken behind it. I sat by the window, forehead against the cold oval of glass, watching the clouds move in slow, rolling layers beneath us. My parents' words replayed in my head like a chorus I couldn't shut off. "You're single. You're stable. You're the one who can help." And beneath all of it, that deeper message they had spoken so plainly months earlier. "You're always last." For the first time in a long time, those words didn't make me angry. They made me tired. Bone deep, tired. I stared at the endless white expanse outside and asked myself the question I had avoided for years. If I save them, does anything actually change? Or do I just prove them right? That they can risk everything because I'll always be there to clean up the mess? That thought sat with me all the way until the wheels touched down on Seattle soil. Jason was waiting for me at the apartment, sitting on the couch with a mug of tea ready. He didn't jump into questions. He didn't rush me. He just looked at me gently and said, "Tell me everything." So I did. All of it. The foreclosure, the lawsuit, the taxes, the co-signed loan, the casual expectation that I'd drop my entire life for theirs. And when I finished, my voice was barely above a whisper. Jason didn't react with outrage or with a prepackaged, "You should do this." He asked something much harder. "Nat, if you choose to help, what's the cost? And if you choose not to help, what's the cost?" The question cracked something inside me, the same way my therapist's question had months earlier. And then he added, "And more importantly, who do you want to be after this decision?" It was one of the few times in my adult life when I couldn't hold back tears. I cried quietly, the way people cry when something finally feels real. Jason wrapped his arms around me, waited until my breathing steadied, and then pulled out his laptop. "Let's look at reality," he said softly. "Not guilt, not fear, just numbers." We sat on the floor, backs against the couch, surrounded by spreadsheets and screenshots. Together, we opened every account I had spent years building: checking, savings, 401k, Roth IRA, equity from the Tacoma condo, estimated value of the duplex, emergency fund, a small taxable investment account I'd never told my family about. Seeing it all laid out was both empowering and terrifying. It reminded me how far I'd come, and how easily all of it could be shattered if I threw myself into their crisis without boundaries. Two possible futures formed in my mind, clear as day. Path 1: save everything. Sell one of my properties, drain my emergency fund, withdraw from retirement accounts with penalties, put my life plans on hold for at least 5 to 7 years, cancel any hope of building the last child fund, take on their chaos as if it were my responsibility. In that path, I survived. But I didn't grow. I shrank. Path 2: save nothing. Let the foreclosure happen. Let Chloe face bankruptcy. Let my parents lose their house. Bear the pain of hearing them call me cold, heartless, selfish. Lose the family I had spent decades trying to belong to. In that path, I kept my life, but possibly lost them. I sat there for a long time, staring at my hands. "Both options hurt," I whispered. Jason nodded. "So choose the one where the pain leads to a healthier version of you." And that was when the third path bloomed in my mind. Not rescue, not abandonment, but something in between. Structured help, boundaries, conditions, grown-up responsibility. If they wanted my support, they wouldn't get it for free. No more free emotional labor. No more free financial bailing. No more, "Natalie will just figure it out." That night, with Jason beside me, I drafted the terms of a loan I could live with. One that would not destroy my financial future even if every penny evaporated. Condition 1: they had to sell assets first. That meant the Estes Park cabin, my parents' pride, and Liam's luxury SUV, completely unnecessary, financed irresponsibly. They needed to show they were willing to sacrifice before I sacrificed anything. Condition 2: the loan would go through an LLC I formed. No verbal promises, no emotional manipulation, no ambiguity. Just contracts, responsibility, and legal protection. Condition 3: mandatory family therapy for 12 months, specializing in favoritism, financial boundaries, and restructuring toxic roles. Condition 4: a signed agreement that they would never use my name, my credit, or my properties as collateral or leverage for any future loan. Condition 5: a public acknowledgement to the extended family, not to humiliate them, but to break the narrative they'd been spreading for years that I was ungrateful. That acknowledgement would state the truth: that for decades I had been the overlooked daughter expected to fill every gap. and that I was helping now because I chose to, not because I owed them my life. While drafting the terms, I also did something small but symbolically important. I went through every subscription they had leached off me without asking. Netflix, Amazon Prime, a language learning app, even a gym membership perk they had somehow gotten access to, and I removed their access. Every login revoked, every password reset, every link severed. Not out of spite, but because I finally understood. Every leak has to be sealed before you can rebuild a foundation. I drafted an email to Jason's lawyer friend detailing the situation, attaching a summary of the potential agreement, asking him to look it over and prepare a formal document by morning. Not because I thought my family would try to trick me, though a part of me knew they might, but because I finally respected myself enough to protect my own interests. By sunrise, the plan was complete. Every number checked, every boundary articulated, every loophole closed. I printed the documents and slid them into a clean folder. On the spine, in small block letters, I wrote one word: first. It wasn't the name of the agreement. It wasn't even a message to them. It was a message to me. A reminder that, for the first time in my life, I was walking into a family crisis not as the sacrificial lamb, not as the forgotten daughter, not as the fallback plan, but as an adult with agency, as someone who could finally say, "Here is what I am willing to do. Here is what I will never do again." The next morning, I flew back to Denver with the folder labeled "First" tucked neatly in my bag. The weight of it felt different from any burden I had ever carried for my family, not heavy with guilt or obligation, but solid with clarity. Jason came with me, offering silent support. He didn't come to fight my battles. He came so I wouldn't have to stand alone in a room where I had been outnumbered my entire life. When we entered my parents' living room, it felt like stepping back into the same scene I'd left days before. The foreclosure letters still stacked on the coffee table, the lawsuit paperwork peeking out from envelopes. The tax notices spread like a map of collapsing decisions, but this time, something was different. It was me. My mother stood quickly, relief flooding her face. "I knew it," she said, clasping her hands together. "I knew you wouldn't let the family sink." Chloe exhaled a shaky smile. "Em always has such a good heart." I told Liam, "You'd come through. We're so lucky." They expected gratitude. They expected reassurance. They expected the old Natalie, the one who'd swallow her needs, open her wallet, shoulder everything with a calm smile. Instead, I sat down, placed the folder on the table, and opened it without a word. For a moment, the only sound in the room was paper sliding across wood. My dad frowned. "What is all this?" I laid out the first set of documents. My net worth summary, mortgage statements, rental income reports, 401k statements, retirement projections, and a breakdown of the two properties and their equity positions. Their eyes widened. My mom covered her mouth. Chloe blinked like she had been slapped by numbers she didn't understand. Liam leaned forward, reading the pages twice as if they might rearrange themselves. "Natalie," my mom whispered. Why didn't you tell us you had all this?" I looked at her steadily. "I did tell you. Or I tried. You just never listened long enough to hear me." Every conversation about my life turned into a conversation about Chloe and the kids. No one spoke. For the first time in my life, the silence in that room didn't swallow me. It swallowed them. I reached for the second stack. "This," I said, sliding it forward, "is what I'm prepared to offer, and the terms under which I will offer it." My dad snatched the papers, scanning quickly. His face flushed. "This is a contract," he said stiffly. "With conditions. With interest. This is how you treat family?" "This," I said quietly, "is how grown adults handle money." And if you want me to act like a bank, fine. But then we follow banking rules. My mom's voice sharpened like broken glass. And what is this about therapy? And a public acknowledgement in front of the whole family? Are you trying to humiliate us? No, I said. I'm trying to stop the narrative that I'm ungrateful. I'm asking for truth, for accountability, for an end to pretending the past didn't happen. Chloe shook her head, tears pooling. How can you be so cold? We're family. You're supposed to help because you love us. I looked at her, not unkindly. Family isn't a reason for one person to always stand first while another always stands last. My dad slammed the contract down. 24 hours? We gave you that. And now you're giving it back to us? Yes, I answered. Yesterday, you gave me 24 hours to decide whether to sacrifice my future for mistakes I didn't make. Today, I'm giving you 24 hours to decide if you want this structured help, or none at all. Chloe began to cry harder. If you don't help us, we'll lose everything. I nodded gently. I know. And if I help without boundaries, I lose everything I've built. I'm not choosing between you and nothing. I'm choosing between my life and your expectations. My mom's voice cracked. If we don't sign, you'll leave us with nothing? No, I said, standing. I'll leave you with your own decisions. The same way I had to live with mine for decades. Jason rose beside me, silently. We walked toward the door. My dad called after me, desperate now. If we don't sign, is that it? Are you abandoning us? I turned back, meeting his eyes. Steady, unshaken. I'm not abandoning you. I'm finally giving you the chance to take responsibility for your choices. The same responsibility I had to take for mine when no one else showed up. And for the first time in my life, I walked out of that house without feeling small, without feeling like a backup plan, without feeling like the last name on a list of priorities. I walked out as someone who finally understood her own worth and refused to hand it over again. 24 hours later, my phone rang. I knew the call was coming before I even looked at the screen. My mother's voice was thin, scraped raw. Natalie, bring the papers. We'll sign. No speeches, no guilt-tripping, just resignation, the kind that comes when denial finally collapses under the weight of reality. When I arrived, they were already seated at the dining table. No one looked at anyone else. My dad stared at his hands. Chloe's mascara was smudged, and Liam looked like he hadn't slept. The stack of documents sat in the center like a quiet judge. One by one they signed. Names shaky, breaths uneven, the sound of pen on paper echoing louder than any argument we'd ever had. And in that strange, heavy silence, I felt something conflicted wash over me, a deep ache for the people I loved, and a strange, steady lightness that came from finally refusing to be sacrificed. They weren't just signing a loan agreement. They were signing the end of the version of me they had depended on for years, and the beginning of someone they didn't quite know how to handle yet. The consequences came fast. First went the cabin in Estes Park, the pride of every holiday brag, every Christmas card backdrop, every family story about our mountain getaway. Watching the listing appear online felt surreal, like seeing a family heirloom at a garage sale. Then went Liam's luxury SUV, the one he insisted he needed, because the kids' car seats wouldn't fit in anything smaller. He drove away in a dented sedan from Facebook Marketplace, silent, jaw tight. Then came the foreclosure. Chloe lost the big suburban house with the vaulted ceilings and the Instagram-perfect front porch. Her new place was a rented duplex with beige carpeting and a backyard the size of a bath towel. The day she moved in, she called me crying. I let it go to voicemail. Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. My parents faced their own downsizing, trading the wide lawn, 4-bedroom house they'd lived in for 20 years for a modest 2-bedroom condo. My mother stood in the driveway the day the movers came, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. For once, she didn't ask me to help carry boxes. For once, she didn't assume I'd be the one to stay until midnight cleaning. Financial counseling began the next week. Liam learned how to build a budget for the first time in his 36 years. Chloe sat through sessions on debt, compulsive spending, and accountability. She complained at first, "This is humiliating." But slowly, something softened in her. She stopped chasing the image of being the perfect mom with the perfect house. She started asking real questions about money instead of assuming someone else would fix everything. Therapy was harder. Hearing my father cry, really cry, for the first time in my life shook something loose inside me. "I thought you didn't need me," he choked out. "I thought you didn't need anyone." My mother's turn was quieter, more raw. "I was scared," she said. "Scared Chloe would fall behind, scared the kids would struggle, scared of failing as a mother. I didn't realize failing you was failing too." I listened, not with a forgiving heart ready to glue everything back together, but with a human one that finally understood their mistakes were built from fear, not malice. The day of the extended family gathering felt like stepping into an alternate universe. A backyard BBQ, kids running around, the smell of grilled corn, and my parents standing together in front of everyone. My aunts, uncles, cousins, hands clasped, voices trembling. My father spoke first. "We need to say something that should have been said a long time ago. We favored one child over the other. We made Natalie carry burdens that weren't hers. And she saved our family, not just with money, but by forcing us to look at ourselves clearly." Murmurs rose, faces turned toward me, not with judgment, but with a kind of startled respect. My mother continued, voice cracking. "Natalie, we're sorry for all of it. You deserved better." And in that moment, the weight of 20 years lifted. Not gone, but finally shared. But apology doesn't equal erasing the past, and responsibility doesn't equal reconciliation. So after the BBQ, after the hugs and the whispering relatives and the awkward tears, I went back to Seattle. I closed my door. I let myself feel everything I hadn't let myself feel while playing the responsible one. The grief of losing the family I thought I had. The relief of no longer being trapped in their expectations. The strange freedom of not being needed as the emergency exit anymore. I didn't run back to check on them every week. I didn't slip into old habits. I didn't rescue them emotionally the way I once would have. I let them rebuild with the tools they should have been using all along. I allowed myself the space to be sad, disappointed, proud, relieved, all at once. My family wasn't fixed. They were simply walking on their own legs now, and I was finally walking on mine. A year passed, then another. Time didn't erase what happened. It simply gave everything room to settle into its true shape. The Brooks family, once defined by appearances and hierarchy, now lived quietly in their modest Denver condo. No more grand vacations, no more shiny upgrades, no more "look at us" family posts. My parents learned to budget the way most people do in their 20s, except they were learning it in their 60s. They no longer spoke in absolutes about Chloe's future or about what they believed I should do. Their tone shifted. Their ambitions shrank to something more human. Chloe now worked as a manager at someone else's gym, not the CEO of a failing chain, not the golden child groomed for constant applause, just a woman rebuilding her life one shift at a time. And surprisingly, she was good at it. Reliable, grounded, almost humble. Liam never missed a payment on the loan. Every month, on the dot, the transfer arrived. Sometimes with a short message, "Thank you for your patience," or "Another month done." He no longer carried the entitlement of a man expecting to be rescued. He carried the responsibility of someone who finally understood the cost of his choices. As for me and Jason, we moved into a townhouse in Seattle with creaky wood floors and a view of the Sound from the upstairs window. It wasn't huge, but it was ours. My office was painted in soft green, with a bookshelf full of personal finance books and a window-facing desk where I ran my workshops. On the hallway wall, I created something I once promised myself I'd never do, a photo collage. But this time, every picture included me fully, in the center, not at the edge. My graduation photo. A camping trip with friends where I laughed so hard my eyes disappeared. Me and Jason on a windy Washington beach, cheeks red, hair messy. A snapshot of the first workshop I hosted. A room of young adults, notebooks open, listening to a topic that once saved me: financial boundaries. I called my project the Last Child Project, a nod to the role I had been forced into and the identity I had reclaimed. With a portion of my investment returns and the monthly loan repayments, I funded small scholarships for young adults estranged from their families, help with community college, coding boot camps, or financial coaching. The first time I approved a scholarship, Jason hugged me and said, "You turned your wound into a ladder for someone else." I told him the truth. If you've ever been last on someone's list, you learn how deeply it matters to make sure no one else ends up there. My relationship with my parents and Chloe didn't vanish. It simply changed shape. I visited when I had the energy. I called when I felt emotionally steady. I left when conversations slipped into old patterns. And when my mother occasionally started slipping back into her familiar refrain. Chloe has the kids. She needs more support. You know how it is. I simply said, gently but firmly, "I'm going to end this call, Mom. I have my own plans today." It wasn't punishment. It was boundary. And boundaries, I learned, are love, directed inward. The holiday season arrived again. Another Thanksgiving, another Christmas. Back in Denver, my parents and Chloe spent Christmas Eve together in their condo, keeping things simple. A small tree, homemade food, no designer outfits, no extravagant spending. Just the three of them adjusting to the life that had always been waiting for them once the illusions fell away. Meanwhile, Jason and I celebrated in a rented cabin in the Cascades with a few close friends. The fireplace crackled, the scent of pine filled the room, and snow rested in soft layers outside the window. It felt warm in a way that had nothing to do with heat. At one point, my phone buzzed with a message from my mom. "I miss you. Thank you for saving the family. I hope one day you can forgive us. And forgive yourself too." I stared at the message for a long moment before a small, quiet smile surfaced. Not triumphant, not bitter. Free. I placed my phone face down on the table. Jason looked over from the kitchen and asked gently, "You okay?" I nodded. "Yeah," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. For the first time in my life, I don't feel like someone standing behind me pulling me back into the line. Later that night, as the snow drifted softly outside and warm laughter filled the room, I felt something settle inside me, a final understanding. Voiceover. My parents once told me, "Your sister's family will always come first. You are always last." I believed them, and the moment I believed them, I understood the truth. I had to step out of the line entirely, to build a place where I didn't need to fight for a spot. Families don't always change because they want to. Sometimes, they only change when the person who's always been last finally chooses herself first, in her own life, in her own future, and in her own quiet, undeniable way.